What philanthropic trends do you think you should pay attention to right now? Hello, Joy Olson, Blockbuster Fundraising 2018. Wow, well, Happy New Year. And I know you're in the midst of so many things right now. You're looking at your December results, you're analyzing them, making sure that everyone's been thanked. You're pulling together the tax records. You are absolutely interested in what the experts are saying about the new tax reform law, and you're also really looking at what all the experts are saying about trends for 2018 fundraising. So I thought today, and I've been studying all this right along with you, and of course trying to figure out what information can I bring to you today that perhaps you haven't already read or considered. So I found this one particular article that I really enjoyed. It's from Campbell & Company, and they have 3 experts on their staff that represent more than 75 years of fundraising expertise. I guess that's what experts are all about, right? Is a lot of expertise. But they had incredibly insightful and thoughtful things to say, and I thought that perhaps you would enjoy looking over, hearing about this information, because they interviewed their team, they looked at what nonprofit leaders should expect and focus on in 2018. So that's got to be important for you. And one of the things that they really reviewed is the way that people support causes that they care about, because guess what? It is constantly evolving. And there's a lot to think about with that right now, especially with the new tax law. The way people support causes they care about is constantly evolving. So what philanthropic trends do you think you should pay attention to right now? All right, there's the 3 experts. They had Kate Roosevelt, who is Executive Vice President of Campbell & Company, Julia McGuire, who is Executive Vice President, and Peter Fissinger, who is President and CEO. Kate Roosevelt of Campbell & Company says that she's watching online and mobile giving combined with crowdfunding, in particular, how organizations are using these tools and how they impact ongoing communications, stewardship, and donor retention. Interesting. Julia McGuire says that with online giving, she worries about the potential for donor fatigue. She feels that every day people are asked by multiple friends to support their causes, whether it's a GoFundMe or a charitable gift to a nonprofit. She says this space is getting noisy, so how do you break through that clutter? She's also paying attention to impact investing, which she says that she's seen predominantly in California, but also in other places where there are pockets of entrepreneurs, because these investors are used to measurable results. And a lot of this rapid outcome-based thinking demands a novel approach from nonprofits. Gonna have to get creative here. Think like an entrepreneur. Well, Kate says many of these young, wealthy entrepreneurs are focused on systems change rather than charity in the traditional sense. So what does it mean to invest in people and organizations that are on the ground, reforming public education and solving the homelessness crisis? Well, Peter Fissinger, the CEO, says another dominant trend that's caught his interest is the continued rise in donor-advised funds. Peter says, I think this is the largest evolution that we've seen in giving in the last 10 to 20 years. Before the advent of the donor-advised funds, only the very wealthy had the option to create a family foundation. And now donor-advised funds have really kind of leveled the playing field because they give more modest but a philanthropic family the opportunity to put their money in a fund and talk to their kids about giving. So all this is just really so interesting, don't you think? They say that following the 2016 presidential election, that we certainly saw a surge in donor support to progressive causes. So, how do they think that this development will affect the 2018 fundraising landscape? Well, Peter says, I think it's going to persevere. There's a considerable movement underway that is impacting progressive organizations. Certain organizations have a window of opportunity that is truly substantial. If they can harness these new donors, their fundraising performance could continue to grow over time. Julia says, I agree. I think this phenomenon will continue to sustain itself because it gives people who are discontent a voice and, more importantly, an avenue to make a difference. Kate says, in 2018, the recipient organizations will need to make decisions about what additional resources they're going to dedicate to donor retention strategies. New kinds of communications and different approaches to fundraising appeals. On a large scale, it remains to be seen how much these practices are going to change and what retention levels these organizations will achieve. We've recently seen record highs, oh boy, across the U.S. stock market. What other economic patterns should we all be watching? Good question. Peter says, disposable income is the single most important economical statistic for giving. He says, I follow changes in disposable income to gauge whether or not philanthropy will rise more than average. Julia says, in general, growth in gross domestic product is positively correlated to dollars given through philanthropy. I think it's stayed pretty steady. This is me saying this, at 2%. Giving has stayed very steady at 2% of gross national product. I don't think there's been much change there at all. Kate says, in addition to these indicators, I think that home values are going to be an increasingly important part of philanthropic picture, particularly as it relates to planned giving. If you look at where she's based, which is in Seattle, she says Seattle continues to be at the top of the list of median home prices nationally. This has the potential to influence the deferred giving landscape in a pretty big way moving forward. All right. What political or legislative changes have the greatest potential to impact philanthropy? What do the experts think? Julia says that tax reform has a potential to really impact philanthropy. The uncertainty it has stirred up, she says. What will be in it? Whether it will pass, well, of course it has passed. What its effects will truly be. And I think everybody is still trying to ascertain this. What are those effects going to be? And they will probably really impact end of year giving because people may make greater contributions, unsure of whether they're going to itemize next year because all this takes place next year, not this year. Others may hold off on estate planning. Well, Peter says within the tax legislation, the reduction in the number of people who itemize is the largest shift. and it could have a strong impact. However, there are several mitigating factors, including the potential effect that tax reform could have on the economy. And Kate says, beyond changes to the standard deduction, tax reform could impact philanthropy and nonprofits in so many ways. For instance, the current bill would eliminate new markets tax credit, which has huge implications for organizations that work in depressed communities. And she says, I also echo Julia's comment about uncertainty, because throughout 2017, legislative uncertainty has rocked nonprofit organizations. In our Giving USA National webinar last June, we heard about the extremely detrimental effect that this uncertainty has across the sector. Many communities were very hard hit by natural disasters in 2017. So, do you expect this to affect fundraising efforts in the coming year? Peter says, I think it's going to cause a spike in human service giving. The question is, will the response to these disasters depress giving to other areas? The data suggests that more than anywhere else, arts and cultural organizations will be impacted. Well, Julia says, I know that according to Giving USA, contributions to arts, culture, and humanities declined in the wake of giving to Hurricane Katrina and the Indian Ocean tsunami relief. Kate says, I'll also be watching to see whether there is a sustained philanthropic effort over the long term to rebuild communities that were devastated by these disasters. Now, here is the question put to the experts. What are your top 2 recommendations for nonprofits to focus on in 2018? Julia says, given the looming specter of tax reform, organizations need to make a compelling case for support. A compelling case of support. Remind people why your organization exists, why what you do is important, and why it's vital that you continue this work. Very important. Second, she says, focus on stewarding relationships. This is going to be more and more important at every level of giving. Make sure that your donors understand their impact. Kate says, I'll add that it's critical for organizations to be informed of, aware of, and engaged in legislative processes that are affecting their missions specifically and the philanthropic landscape more generally. Nonprofits also need to interpret and communicate these effects to their donors. And to build on Julia's second point, I advise to double down on donor communications, not only as a stewardship tool, but as an advocacy tool as well. It's good advice, don't you think? Well, Peter, the CEO, says technology is key to effective donor communications. So leaders should continue to focus on how they can use technology to communicate with their donors in as targeted a way as possible. It's got to be targeted communication. He says, more than ever, I'm also stressing donor retention to every single organization with which I work. If people give 3 or 4 years in a row, they tend to keep giving. There's a case to be made that this should be the most important fundraising goal that any organization has. Well, thank you very much, Campbell and Company. I think this is illuminating, and I think that we get 3 different experts with really great advice. I hope that this helps you sift through what you think your trends, your fundraising trends in 2018 are going to be, and how you can incorporate plans in your fundraising plans, incorporating these trends. Hey, Joy Olson here at Blockbuster Fundraising 2018, and we're ready to go. 70 days of winter ahead, and there's lots to do in winter. So we're going to help you tackle that winter fundraising plan and effort and all the great things that you're going to do. Okay, a lot more at www.blockbusterfundraising.com, joyolsongroup.com, and on our Blockbuster Fundraising YouTube channel. See you soon. Inspiration right around the corner. That's Blockbuster Fundraising. So join us Tuesdays at 1 on Facebook Live. You will leave inspired in some way, in some Blockbuster fundraising way. Thanks. Bye-bye.